Welcome to Bizpulse and thank you for joining us. My name is Cindy Mabi. Good evening to you. Retailer Pick n Pay say they disagree with the sentiment that exclusive lease agreements dampened competition in the market. The group's management testified at the grocery retail market inquiry underway at the CSIR in Pretoria. The group's head of strategy says the inquiry is proceeding from an incorrect notion of the actual size and composition of the South African grocery market. And more so, he says the claim that 4 large supermarkets account for 90% of the market is factually incorrect, and that inaccurate information about the size of the market can be obtained from research groups such as Nielsen and information on turnover published in annual reports.
Size and composition of the South African grocery retail market. Now, in this section, I'd like to begin by referring to the Commission's terms of reference for this inquiry, which of course take us back to October 2015, when those were published. And paragraph 3.1 of those state that the 4 largest supermarket chains operating in South Africa collectively account for more than 90% of the market. The inquiry is at risk of proceeding from what we think is a false premise in relation to the size of the market and the share of the market held by the largest 4 supermarkets. And I'll explain that in a moment. Secondly, to address the questions that the inquiry has posed to us in relation to shopping centres and lease agreements, which essentially covers questions 1 to 58 of the letter of the 13th of October.
Is also of the opinion that exclusive lease agreements do not lessen competition, as individual supermarkets do not constitute a geographical market, and that consumers can choose between many centres located in close proximity to each other.
The key question posed by the panel here is whether lease agreements pose a competitive constraint or substantively lessen competition in the market. And we believe that the answer to those questions is firmly no. First of all, individual shopping centres do not constitute a relevant geographic market. Secondly, as I've already outlined, there are many shopping centres in South Africa, and in our experience, many in close proximity to the shopping centres in which we have stores. And customers choose between centres, and they choose between stores inside centres and stores outside centres.
At day 5 of the grocery retail market inquiry public hearings, retail giant Pick n Pay made a submission stating that exclusivity clauses are necessary to the market as they serve a purpose that maintains the retailer's financial viability and lessens their risk. Kani Mapanga, ANN7, Pretoria.
And joining us on the phone lines are Mark Gampi, by Black SA Secretary, and Leon Lowe, Free Market Foundation Executive Director via Skype, Adrian Richards, Retail Buyer Expert, and Panichi Gondu, Soweto Brands Director. Good evening to all our guests, and thanks so much for joining us. Just to explain to me, Leon Lowe, when the submission was made by Pick n Pay that essentially they may have a number of stores across the landscape, but it doesn't necessarily constitute uncompetitive behavior. What is your view to this response?
I don't particularly have a view on Pick n Pay and whether it behaves competitively or not, but I do understand basic economics, which tells you that what you need for competition is what's called competitiveness. The market must be competitive.
Leon, your audio is not so great, so I'm just going to ask our producers to repatch you. But I mean, this is also, it can be said for other major retailers, in the sense that, Mr. Gampi, especially if we're talking about transformation and encouraging or loosening the barriers of entry in getting into this particular space, that there is a question that we need to answer around legislation and policy in how we ensure that we don't just see the major players taking the market share.
True, Cindy. If you look at it, is that we need to do quite a lot in terms of improving preferential procurement in South Africa. Because the retail market we're talking about is the backbone of South African economy. You see, so we need to look in terms of preferential procurement. We need to look in terms of enterprise development. We need also to look in terms of the supplier value chain and the development, and as well as consumer activism within the retail market. So those are the things we need to look very carefully and see where are we taking this market to.
Mr. Gondo, you also submitted at the retail inquiry, and you're saying that the policies, in fact, perpetuate what we see as a dominance in various sectors, and that these retailers will come there with a whole host of their attorneys. How then do we effect this, balancing the scales when it comes to competitive behavior or not?
You see, the element of competition in South Africa is viewed from what I call from a point of view where people just take what is there as given. The element that we should have to look at is where are we coming from and where are we going. The issue is, I don't think you need a scientist or an astronomist to actually tell that the retail industry in South Africa, more than 99% is actually owned by probably 4 companies. Even a grade 1 child can even tell you that. So when we hear the submission that the figures are telling to the contrary, I don't know where they get the figures from. But to me, the issue is how does the policy enforcement and how does the government actually by all means try to ensure that at least people who want to get into this industry sector are able to get in this industry sector. So if you look at the economics of the whole industry sector, you could see that it is actually not a perfect competition. Because if you look at all the 5 retail organizations, they are all on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. If they want to do any move, they go to the market and raise fees and raise funds, which the small individuals are not able to do. So you can see the kind of disequilibrium that I'm talking about here.
But Mr. Kampi, then how do you work around that, especially if you have neoliberalism approach towards protecting business, all in the interest of creating jobs and stimulating the economy, etc., but in itself it still perpetuates the dominance. So the policy obviously needs to reform.
True. If you look at it at a study, one of the things we need to look at is that even the way the investment of the retail market is skewed in South Africa. Look at, for example, the study shows that the average value of the startup investment in retail market, let's take for instance something like a spider shop. You might find that most of the South Africans, they don't invest much money because they don't have in the retail shop compared to other people from other countries. That's the first thing we need to look at. The second one is the issue of saying, what are we doing about the lack of marketing strategy to ensure sustainability and growth in the retail market? The third thing we need to look at, we need to look in terms of inefficient use of machinery capacity and human capital due to the low volumes of the same thing, the retail market. And also, there is no income growth, income and growth in the retail market. Especially, people, they view that as something like a startups. So one of the things we need to look at, how can we make the retail market becoming sustainable for the startups. Those are the things maybe we need to look at.
All right, we also have Adrian Richards, a retail buyer expert in retail buying. Mr. Richards, thanks so much for joining us. Just picking up from one of our panelists who says that the dominance of particular companies in this sector needs to be viewed in the context of where this country comes from and, the exclusion of some from the economy and their ability to even compete or start up similar industries. What is your view?
Well, Sandy, you know what? I beg to differ with those experts. If you look at the retail landscape, let's just give you a simple example. Pick and Pay family stores, there's over 250 stores in the inland region. If you go to Massmart and you talk about Cambridge Food, you only got 22 maybe stores. Where's the fairness in that? I mean, having all these malls built and the big major two, Shoprite, Checkers or Pick and Pay coming in as the preferred tenant is completely anti-competitive. Why don't you let in all the 4 or 5 big players in and let them compete on price?
All right, Mr. Richard, or rather Leon Lowe, Free Market Foundation Executive Director, now joins us on the phone. Hi, Leon. Thanks so much for joining us. You know, just picking up on Mr. Richard saying that the consumer ought to have the choice of where they buy based on price or quality or whatever it is that appeals to them. But in this case, you tend to have key anchor tenants, be it either Pick and Pay or Shoprite, Checkers. Is this fair? And they argue that this doesn't necessarily affect competition in having exclusive lease agreements.
Yes, a whole lot of very confusing things have been discussed so far in your program, and it's quite difficult to unpack them. Let's deal with question 1, the interests of consumers, and particularly the interests of poor and low-income consumers. Their interests are that it should be a maximally competitive market in which prices are driven downwards. And the way to achieve that is to remove all entry barriers, regulatory barriers, and if there are other barriers, to remove them too, to maximize entry. A completely different and opposing view, which people confuse with this, is to say that the 4 or 5 big ones should be more competitive, they're locked in collusion, they are raising prices. But bearing in mind that if they are really raising prices, this is an opportunity for transformation and small business to move in. If competition policy has the effect of them reducing prices, that reduces the opportunities for emerging and transformational businesses. Also, it should be understood there was a discussion, for your point made, about their procurement policies, procuring, let's say, from transformational purposes and suppliers. Again, if there are small businesses, they don't get involved in anything like that. They simply buy their supplies where they can. So what you want in the end is to have some clarity on what we are talking about. Are we talking about small business opportunities? Are we talking about transformational procurement? Are we talking about the interests of consumers? And I'm afraid to say these are opposing objectives. You can't have them all in one policy. And this is why competition policy is very unhelpful. It's very confused. It's not clear what it is they are trying to achieve. If you go to the website of the Competition Commission, you'll see that they have a giant big palace. It actually looks like a castle. They spend 280 billion rand a year on a whole lot of highly qualified lawyers and economists who actually, I'm sorry to say, don't know what they're trying to do. They can't make up their mind what they want. Now, what I think, if you want to talk about consumers, which was your question, then what you want is what's called in economics competitiveness or contestability. In other words, it doesn't matter how big or small anyone is. It doesn't matter whether they have anchor tenants or not. What matters is, can they be contested? Can they be contested by another big supplier, another big shopping center, or lots of small ones in the local neighborhood, or small towns or villages or settlements? And what you want, and this is, in my view, the only thing that the Competition Commission should concern itself with, unfortunately it doesn't,
all right,
is
Mr.
that the market must be contestable. It just must be contestable markets. That's the question.
All right, so Mr. Gambi, I'm sure in your view, though, in using history as the context to which we need to approach the presence of particular players in any given industry, you think that we tend to brush that aside and focus more on the stimulus of the economy and creating jobs, and in essence, we're not changing much. You know, the status quo remains.
I think we need to look at the 10 key store solution of the retail market. Because if you look at them, that most of the retail shops, they generally rely on the wholesalers and distribution centers for their development. Most of the commodities and the quantities they purchase, they can never match to the wholesalers like Pick and Pay and others. And it doesn't even warrant a direct account with the manufacturing supply. So most of them, they cannot even open the proper direct access to the manufacturing supplier. And this further hinders their growth. And due to the small quantities which they purchase over a basket of limited item stock. And what their negotiating power with the supplier is just very limited. And these are the challenges which are raised and questioned regarding the sustainability of small retailers. And it confirmed that there's a need for local traders to be empowered with the skills to manage their own business better than for survival. So in an essence, we need to develop a 10 key solutions. And also, we formalize the retail market, especially in South Africa.
All right, Mr. Kampi, thanks indeed for your time. That's Buy Black SA Secretary Zama Kampi and Leon Low, Free Market Foundation Executive Director. Mr. Gundo, you've participated and submitted to the Competition Tribunal on various issues around the retail space. Even tried a program of industrialization, producing your own goods, etc. The level of competition, or rather adversities against small businesses, are insurmountable, and yet you continue to participate in these platforms. Do you think it's of any value in the long run if we continue to do the same thing expecting different results? What do you think this particular inquiry would be able to achieve?
Yeah, to me, I think the issue is about engagement, because what we need to do is we need to engage, and especially engage with the Competition Commission and also with the Department of Trade and Industry, and say to them, do you understand what happens in this industry? Do you understand the economics of the retail industry? Do you understand the price development from point A to point B? And some of the things that happens in the industry, actually some of the things that real the naked eye cannot see, because from a real point of view, the retailers that we have now are not real retailers. In real sense, they're actually manufacturers. If you go into Pick and Pay, you go into ShopRite, you see they've got their own brands. So that means if you are a producer or if you're a manufacturer, Pick and Pay will not take your goods because you are competing with them. They won't give you shelf space because you are competing with them. So if you look at it from this perspective, you see that the whole supply chain, the whole value chain of the retail industry is actually controlled by these four guys. So they decide who to take and who to leave. And at the end of the day, the question is, do we understand what is happening? Do we understand the economics? And if we want to change, what do we want to change? Because to me, I think even the Competition Commission got it wrong when they looked at the issue about the issue of the malls and the shopping centers and all these kind of things. To me, the issue is not about shopping centers and malls. The issue is about the value chain. Because obviously, the guys who own the land, who build the shopping malls, they won't take the small guys at the end of the day. Be that as it may, even if I go there, I want to take even if I'm given the opportunity to go and occupy a prime space at the Mall of Africa, I can take it because I don't have the funds to do that. So naturally, it's not a question of the big guys are chosen or they are preferred.
Yeah.
Or
so what
whatever.
you're saying, Mr. Gundo, is that, and I'll pose this to Mr. Richards, that there is a concerted effort to exclude those that have been marginalized and who are smaller players, albeit that we have policy in place that encourages business and industrialization. It is virtually impossible to penetrate what is already a dominance of the value chain of the Big Five. Hi, Adrian.
Hi, Cindy. Yes. Just going back to what Mr. Gonda said, the house brands or the private label brands are packed by existing major suppliers. So if Cool Baked Beans is on shelf, if possibly the Pick and Pay brand would be packed by the manufacturers of Cool. That in its sense is already exclusionary to smaller suppliers because the main concern is accreditation, HACCP, food standards for the smaller guys. And if the smaller guys were up to spec, they would definitely get the contracts to do the co-packing for the major retailers. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of this is the trading terms and the rebates that they tie up with the suppliers. The major suppliers have turned volumes and generated billions over the years. Now a small guy comes in and the major retailers want the exact same trading terms, like let's call it 15% of your actual monthly sales, which is a bit unfair on the smaller guy. The smaller guy needs to grow. So what needs to happen here is the entire value chain needs to be looked at. Smaller guys must get preferential space on shelf, number one. They must also get the co-packing agreement to help build capacity at the factory gate, and that in turn will help in create employment. Thirdly, the input costs. We got to look at that because the entire the whole value chain is based on transport, packaging, etc. And our smaller guys will never be competitive because the big players, the pioneers, and that, they built their value chains over years. And they've built their packaging, the cost, and so on over years. And that is why they will constantly be backed, because everybody backs a winning horse.
Mm. No, and I mean, you know, and that's why it makes it even more difficult, I think, getting almost like a blanket solution in the short term of how, you know, smaller players can penetrate this particular market. But in your view, just the entire inquiry, Mr. Richards, what is it likely to yield, if not just to compile a neat report and maybe a penalty here and there and we move right along?
Yeah, but you see, we keep going back to the 10%. When are we going to get the economy going? The economy needs small businesses. The economy needs smaller factories to grow into medium to large businesses. The Competitions Commission is just going to be looking at exclusion from malls, but they've got to look at the entire value chain. They've got to look at manufacturing right into the costs. The total input cost to manufacture a product, then the marketing cost, then the listing of the product at the major retailers. It's an entire process that has to be looked at, and not just shopping malls, etc.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a lengthy and cumbersome process indeed with this inquiry, but we'll keep engaging. And thank you so much, Mr. Kundo, for your time. We had on the phone line Zama Gampi, Buy Black SA Secretary, Leon Lowe, Free Market Foundation Executive. Unfortunately, the line cut there. And Adrian Richards is a retail buyer expert, and Panichi Kundo, Soweto Brands Director. Thanks for watching. We took a look at the latest weather update. Do stay with ANN7 Prime.